My name is Sophia Williams. I'm 34. I was 14 years old, standing near a glass wall at Dubai International Airport, when I understood that my passport wasn't missing. It had been taken. The departure board behind me flicked from boarding to departed, and the flight number matched the one on my paper tag, the one my brother had been holding a few minutes earlier. My mother and my brother were already on that plane. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching the gate clear. The floor was so polished it reflected my shoes. People moved around me with carry-ons and coffee cups, the sound of rolling wheels steady and unbothered. I checked my pockets again, even though I already knew. No passport, no boarding pass, no phone. My bag felt too light. An airline employee asked for my documents. I told her I didn't have them. She asked where my parents were. I pointed toward the empty jet bridge and said they had just left. She looked past me, then back at my face, and asked how old I was. I told her. Her posture changed. She didn't raise her voice or touch my arm. She asked me to wait where I was and walked toward a radio clipped to her belt. I sat on the edge of a metal bench and tried to slow my breathing. My stomach hurt, sharp and hollow. I could still picture my brother's hand closing the zipper on my backpack, the sound neat and final. I hadn't questioned it at the time. I had trusted him. A security officer approached, stopping a few steps away. He asked the same questions calmly, as if this happened every day. I answered without adding anything extra. When he asked who had my passport, I said my brother. When he asked where my mother was, I said she was on the plane with him. He nodded once and spoke quietly into his radio. Around us, the airport kept working. Screens refreshed. Announcements echoed and faded. Somewhere above, my family's plane was already in the air, climbing away, while I sat hungry and still, waiting for someone to decide what to do with a 14-year-old who had been left behind. They moved me a few steps to the side, just out of the flow of people. Not a room yet, just a corner near a column where the air felt cooler. The airline employee returned with a tablet and asked me to spell my last name again. I did. She scrolled, frowned slightly, and said I was marked as a no-show. She asked if I'd missed boarding on my own. I shook my head once. I didn't argue with the label. I just said my brother had my documents. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She asked if I'd argued with my family. I said no. Each question came carefully, as if she was checking for a story that might make this simpler. I didn't give her one. A different staff member asked if I could call my mother. I told him I didn't have my phone. He asked if I knew her number. I said I didn't. That part embarrassed me more than I expected, so I folded my hands together to keep them still. They spoke to each other quietly, standing a few feet away. I could hear the words minor and passport and international. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. Time stretched. My legs went numb from the bench. I stood up, then sat back down when a security officer gestured gently for me to stay put. He wasn't unkind. He just needed me not to move. Someone brought a small bottle of water and set it beside me without comment. I didn't drink it right away. I waited until they stopped watching. Another attempt was made to reach my mother. Someone explained that her phone would be in airplane mode. That explanation seemed to satisfy the adults more than it satisfied me. I was asked, again, if I was certain my brother hadn't just gone ahead by mistake. I said nothing this time. I looked at the floor and waited for the question to pass. Eventually, the security officer crouched slightly so we were closer to eye level. He told me they needed to take me to an office while they sorted things out. He said it would be quieter there. I picked up my bag and followed him without speaking. I didn't know then what that decision, walking instead of protesting, was going to set in motion. I just knew that staying calm was the only thing I still had control over. The office wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a holding room or anything with bars. It looked like a place where paperwork usually lived, 2 desks, a printer humming softly, a window that faced the runway instead of the terminal. Someone asked me to sit. I did. They asked for my name again. I watched it get typed into a different system than before. A longer form, more boxes. A woman in a navy jacket came in and asked the security officer a question I couldn't hear. He answered quietly, then added something and nodded toward me. The word passport came up again, followed by taken, not lost, not misplaced. She turned to me and asked who had packed my bag. I said I had. She asked who last handled it. I said my brother. She paused, then asked how old he was. When I told her, she wrote it down instead of just nodding. That was the first moment I noticed the shift. Phones came out, not personal ones, work phones. One call ended quickly. Another lasted longer. I heard a location mentioned. I heard the word Bangkok. I hadn't said it yet, but they already knew where my family was headed. The printer started spitting out a page with my name at the top. Someone slid it across the desk and asked me to confirm the spelling. My hands shook a little when I held the pen, so I rested my wrist against the table until it steadied. They asked me to describe my backpack. Color, zippers, a small tear near the strap. I told them. I could see the picture forming for them piece by piece. At some point, a man I hadn't seen before stood in the doorway and listened without interrupting. He wore a badge I didn't recognize and didn't sit down. When the woman finished, he asked one question, very evenly. Did anyone give permission for your documents to be taken? I said no. He nodded once and stepped back out into the hall. No one told me what that meant. No one needed to. The room felt different after that, quieter, but heavier. Like something had been put into motion that wouldn't stop just because someone said they were sorry. I looked out the window at the empty stretch of runway and realized, for the first time, that this wasn't just about me being left behind. It was about the fact that someone had decided I didn't count, and that decision had just been recorded. While they worked around me, I started noticing how familiar the feeling was, sitting quietly while adults talked about me instead of to me. That had been the pattern for as long as I could remember. After my father died, the house reorganized itself without anyone saying it out loud. My brother became central. His moods mattered. His explanations were accepted as facts. If something went wrong, it was usually assumed I'd misunderstood, overreacted, or caused it by being difficult without realizing it. There was one afternoon that stayed with me. I was 11. A glass got knocked over during dinner. It shattered near my chair. I hadn't touched it, but my brother said I'd been swinging my legs. My mother didn't ask anything else. She just told me to clean it up carefully and not make messes when people were tired. I remember kneeling on the floor with a towel, picking up shards, thinking that the story had already settled before I opened my mouth. That happened a lot. Small things decided quickly, always in the same direction. I learned early that staying quiet made everything move faster. Teachers praised me for being easy. Family friends called me low maintenance. At home, that translated into being overlooked without complaint. The only person who didn't do that was my father's mother. She sent cards with handwriting that slanted too much to the right. She remembered what books I liked and mailed me used copies with notes tucked inside. When I talked, she listened long enough to hear the end of the sentence. A few months before the trip, I'd been accepted into a competitive arts program. Full scholarship. I told my mother at the kitchen counter. She smiled, distracted, and said we'd talk about logistics later. My brother didn't say anything at all. That night, I heard him on the phone behind his bedroom door, his voice low and sharp. I caught pieces, 18 money, she doesn't know. When the floor creaked under me, the call ended. The next morning, he asked why I'd been eavesdropping. I said I hadn't been. He smiled like that settled it. Sitting in the airport office years later, I didn't replay those moments emotionally. They lined up instead, like paperwork finally put in order. Nothing that had happened that day stood alone. It fit a shape I already knew, one where my absence made things easier, and my silence was expected to smooth it over. Outside the window, another plane taxied past. Inside, someone added a note to my file. For the first time, the pattern wasn't being ignored. It was being documented. The layover itself had been presented as a break. 6 hours between flights, long enough to stretch, eat, wander. My mother said it would make the trip feel less rushed. She said it the way she said most things, decided, already moving on. Dubai was brighter than anywhere I'd ever been. Everything gleamed. Even the air felt controlled. My brother walked a few steps ahead of us, pulling his suitcase like it had weight beyond clothes. I carried a small backpack with my passport, boarding pass, and the envelope my grandmother had insisted I keep close, folded so many times it was soft. At some point near a wide corridor lined with shops, my brother slowed down and suggested we split up for a bit. He said there was a watch store he wanted to see. My mother wanted coffee. He looked at me and said I could browse if I wanted. I nodded. It sounded reasonable. He reached for my backpack without hesitation, like it was already decided. He said he'd hold on to it so I didn't have to worry about it while walking around. I remember the zipper catching slightly as I handed it over. I remember thinking it made sense. He was older. He was responsible. That was the role he'd been given. I stepped into a bookstore near the gate area. It smelled like paper and something sweet from the cafe next door. I flipped through a paperback and lost track of time the way you do when you feel safe. When I came back out, the corridor looked the same but felt emptied of purpose. I scanned faces, then signs, then the clock. I didn't see them. I walked back toward the cafe, then toward the watch store. I checked the gate again, thinking maybe they'd circled back. The departure board updated while I stood there. I didn't understand what it meant at first. Only later, sitting in the office with the runway in view, did I think about that moment, the ease of the handoff, the way my brother hadn't looked back when he took the bag. At the time, it hadn't felt like a decision. It had felt like routine. I walked back to the gate a second time, slower. The line that had been there earlier was gone. The rope barriers had been pulled back. The screen above the counter no longer said boarding. It said closed. I waited until an airline employee finished typing and asked if she could check something for me. I gave her my last name. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen again. She asked if I had boarded already. I said no. She asked if I was traveling alone. I said no and pointed behind me without really knowing why. I told her my mother and brother were with me. I told her they must be nearby. She scrolled, then tilted the screen slightly away from me. Her voice stayed neutral when she said the rest of my party had boarded. She said the aircraft was already pushing back. She said I was listed as a no-show. I asked how that could be true. She asked for my boarding pass. I told her my brother had it, along with my passport. I heard my own voice say it steady, like it was a small inconvenience instead of what it was. She paused and asked me to wait one moment. That was when it settled in, not all at once, but enough to make my hands cold. There was no version of this where they were coming back, no announcement, no last-minute call. The jet bridge was empty, the doors were sealed. I stepped aside so other passengers could pass, even though there were fewer now. I pulled my backpack onto my lap out of habit, then remembered it wasn't there. I searched anyway, touching pockets, checking again, as if the contents might have rearranged themselves. A security officer approached and asked what was going on. I told him. He asked where my documents were. I told him who had them. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked me to come with him. As we walked, I looked once more toward the gate, half expecting to see my mother rushing back, confused, apologetic. The space stayed empty. The screens updated to the next flight. That was the moment I understood I hadn't been forgot. I had been left. They brought me back to the office, but this time there were more people waiting. Not crowded, just occupied. Chairs had shifted. A folder sat open on one desk with my name written across the tab in block letters. Someone asked me to confirm my date of birth. Someone else asked where we were flying from and where we were supposed to land. I answered each question once, clearly, and then stopped speaking unless asked again. I could feel the pull to over-explain, to justify myself, but I didn't. I'd learned that doing less was safer. An attempt was made to reach my mother through the airline. A message was sent through internal channels, then another. When that didn't work, someone explained, more to the room than to me, that phones were usually unreachable during flight. A staff member asked if I had any emergency contacts memorized. I shook my head. That answer was written down too. Time moved differently there. Minutes felt padded. A clock ticked, but I didn't track it closely. I focused on keeping my shoulders relaxed, my hands folded in my lap. At some point, they asked if I was hungry. I said yes. That seemed to matter. A note was added to the file. Someone stepped out and returned with a small packaged sandwich and another bottle of water. I ate slowly, even though my stomach cramped at the first bite. I heard the word abandoned for the first time then. Not directed at me, spoken into a phone, low and careful. I watched the person speaking turn slightly away, as if the word itself needed space. Another call went out. This one lasted longer. When it ended, the person on the phone didn't put it away right away. They stood still for a moment, then asked if I could tell them exactly when I'd last seen my brother. I gave the time as best I could. They thanked me, not automatically, like it meant something. No one told me what was going to happen next, but the rhythm had changed. This wasn't a misunderstanding being smoothed over anymore. It was a situation being transferred, quietly, from customer service to something else. I sat there, watching adults do their jobs, and realized I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was being processed. It was quiet when he arrived, not the kind of entrance that draws attention. He stood just inside the doorway and listened for a moment before anyone acknowledged him. He didn't sit right away. He asked one question to the room, not to me, and waited for the answer without interrupting. When he finally turned toward me, he kept a respectful distance, as if he didn't want to crowd whatever space I still had. He introduced himself simply and asked if he could speak with me for a few minutes. His voice was even, not rehearsed. I nodded. He pulled a chair back and sat across from me, not at the desk. He asked how I was holding up. I said I was fine. He didn't challenge that. He asked if I'd eaten. I told him yes. Then he asked me to tell him what happened, in my own words, from the moment we landed. I noticed that he didn't take notes while I spoke. He watched my face instead. When I paused to remember something small, a shop name, the order of events, he waited without filling the silence. I told him about the backpack, about handing it over, about coming back to an empty gate, about realizing my documents were gone. When I mentioned my brother, his expression changed slightly. Not shock, recognition. He asked if this kind of thing had happened before. Not this exactly, but being blamed, being sidelined. I said yes. Once. That was enough. He leaned back and folded his hands together. He said there were situations where misunderstandings resolved quickly, and there were situations where they didn't. He said mine fell into the second category. He didn't say it dramatically. He said it like a logistical fact. He told me he had a daughter once, not much older than I was then. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The way he spoke told me that this wasn't theoretical for him. He said what had happened to me involved missing documents, an unaccompanied minor, and international travel. He said those things carried weight. He said he was going to make some calls. Before he stood up, he asked me one more thing. Did anyone give permission for you to be left behind? I said no. He nodded once, as if confirming something he already suspected, and left the room. I didn't know exactly who he was or what authority he had, but the air felt steadier after that, like the room had stopped waiting for instructions and started following them. After he left, someone brought me to a small, staff-only area. It wasn't intimidating, just a room with filing cabinets, a computer, and a table where a woman quietly placed a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. I ate slowly, listening to the soft hum of the office. Through the open door, I could hear the man, Mohammed, I later learned, speaking on the phone. He asked for security footage from the gates, describing a minor who had been deliberately left behind and whose documents were missing. His tone was precise, measured, like he was cataloging a process, not dramatizing it. When the footage arrived, they wheeled a monitor over. I watched a replay of my backpack sitting on the floor near the gate. Then I saw it, my brother's hand unzipping the zipper, lifting my passport and boarding pass, a small, deliberate smile on his face. The camera caught him whispering something to my mother, and I saw her expression shift, briefly tense, then dismissive, and she walked away without looking back. I stayed quiet, breathing shallowly, watching the pieces line up. Every detail confirmed what I already suspected, but seeing it made the situation undeniable. Later, when I mentioned overhearing my brother talk about the trust fund and turning 18, Mohammed's expression changed again. He didn't question me. Instead, he said people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. The weight of the words was quiet, but it sparked something I hadn't felt before, a controlled, steady anger. Mohammed made more calls. He contacted authorities in Thailand and the U.S. Embassy in Dubai. He explained that when my mother and brother landed, officials would meet them and the situation would be addressed. Then he asked me if I wanted to be involved or stay out of it. I nodded slowly. I wanted to watch. Hours had passed, and I realized that the quiet steps being taken around me were pushing toward consequences that my brother and mother couldn't sidestep. After the footage, Mohammed sat back and spoke quietly, almost to himself at first. Then he asked me to explain what I knew about my father's documents. I told him about overhearing my brother months before, words like trust fund and 18 that made no sense to me at the time. He nodded, asking only a few clarifying questions. When I mentioned the amount he had referenced, his eyes widened just slightly, the way someone might notice a faint thread running through a knot. He explained that my father had set up a trust fund, split evenly between my brother and me. My brother's portion would be available when he turned 18. Mine was tied to educational expenses until I was 25. Legally, it was untouchable. I realized then why my brother had orchestrated this Dubai incident. He had been trying to convince my mother to consolidate the funds, to get control over my share, and this layover had been his opportunity. Mohammed didn't comment on morality. He just said that greed often reveals character, quietly, in steps that seem small at the time. He suggested I review my father's documents when I could. "Your father believed in you," he said. "He made sure you were protected, even if no one else noticed." I nodded. The thought settled into me more steadily than anger had. What had felt like abandonment suddenly had context. This was about control and preparation, not just malice. The airport was no longer just a place I had been left behind, it was the moment the plan became visible. I felt a faint sense of clarity, a line drawn between what my brother wanted and what was actually mine. For the first time that day, it felt like I had space to hold that truth without needing anyone to validate it. Over the next hour, the room shifted from quiet observation to coordinated action. Mohammed made several calls, speaking with officials in Thailand and the U.S. Embassy in Dubai. I wasn't told everything, only enough to know that people on the other end of the line were already positioning themselves to meet my mother and brother the moment the plane landed. At one point, a representative from the embassy appeared on a small video feed. She explained the seriousness of abandoning a minor internationally and confirmed that the stolen documents could not be ignored. I answered her questions clearly, stating the facts. My brother had my passport and boarding pass, my mother had left me behind, no permission had been given. The room had an almost mechanical rhythm. Someone typed, someone paged through files. Another person dialed a number and spoke quietly while looking over a monitor. I ate another small sandwich, listening to the occasional fragment, detained, escort, legal consequences. Mohammed glanced at me once and asked if I wanted to see what was happening in real time. I nodded. A feed showed the Bangkok airport gates. I watched as the plane touched down. Passengers streamed off, normal, carrying bags, unaware of the web waiting for them. When my mother and brother emerged, officials intercepted them immediately. My mother spoke first, claiming confusion. My brother tried to talk over them, waving his hands, but one of the officers held up a hand. They began to show the security footage and, later, text messages that documented his plan. From where I sat, hundreds of miles away in Dubai, I could see the shifts, control moving from them to authorities, my brother's smirk fading, my mother's expression changing from defensiveness to shock. I didn't cheer. I just observed. It was methodical, procedural, and inevitable. Each action taken by the officials confirmed that my decision to remain present, quiet, patient, observant, had aligned with a process that couldn't be sidestepped. On the feed, I watched my mother and brother step off the plane. They looked composed at first, carrying bags as if nothing had happened. The embassy official approached, and my mother began to speak, her voice sharp with surprise, explaining some misunderstanding. Then the security officer showed her the footage. The moment my brother unzipped my backpack, lifted my passport and boarding pass, and whispered to her. I saw the color drain from her face. She went still, the explanation catching in her throat. My brother started to talk over her, saying it was a joke, a prank, something she could dismiss. But an officer held up a hand, and someone produced a phone showing his messages, 3 weeks' worth of carefully planned texts to a girlfriend, laying out the entire scheme. How he would get rid of me in Dubai, manipulate Mom about the trust fund, and ensure his control. I didn't speak into the feed, but I watched the sequence of realization unfold. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to fear. She read his messages herself, the words confirming everything she had chosen not to see before. My brother's smooth explanations collapsed under the weight of proof. The officers began processing the situation. My brother was detained for questioning and to secure documents. My mother was separated briefly, given interviews, and informed of potential consequences, though she was clearly still in shock. From Dubai, I could see the subtle power shift. The authority had moved from them to the officials, and my brother's carefully maintained control had evaporated. My mother's attempts to intervene or explain no longer held sway. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired, quiet, and a little hollow. But I also felt the unmistakable relief of boundaries finally being enforced by others with clarity and without my having to argue. After the detention, an embassy official explained the financial side clearly. My father's trust fund had been split in two, half for my brother at 18, half for me, legally protected until I reached 25 and tied to education. My brother had been plotting to access both shares early, trying to manipulate my mother into consolidating the funds. They showed excerpts from his messages, the plan laid out in plain text. Once she's out of the way in Dubai, Mom will choose me, then the money is mine. Another, she doesn't even know about the fund. Problem solved. I listened quietly as the officer read them aloud, feeling the weight of intention behind every word. The legal explanation made the betrayal concrete. My father had seen this coming, structuring my portion so it couldn't be taken. My mother had been misled, convinced by years of favoritism and his rehearsed manipulations. Mohammed told me earlier that people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. Now, everything lined up. The abandonment, the lies, the careful planning, it was all visible. I felt a quiet recognition rather than anger. My father had protected me, even when no one else had. That protection wasn't abstract. It was tangible in law and structure, giving me a stake my brother could not touch. Watching the officials move efficiently, I understood that my father's nickname for me, Hidden Gem, was literal. My share was safe, deliberately kept out of sight until I could claim it. Through a video call, I was finally connected to my mother. She looked exhausted, disoriented, and still trying to piece together what had happened. She started to speak quickly, apologizing, explaining, insisting she hadn't known. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I paused, letting the room's silence stretch just enough for her words to land. Then I said plainly, "You didn't check. You didn't ask me. You just believed him." Her hands moved, almost reaching toward the camera, but I didn't flinch. I waited until her voice quieted, then added, "You've always believed him. My whole life you've chosen him over me, every single time." I let that hang between us, steady and calm, before finishing. "I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the one who doesn't matter." She went quiet, her expression shifting from pleading to recognition. No theatrics, no shouting, just the clear statement of what had always been true. The line ended soon after, leaving me sitting with my own thoughts, the events solidifying around me. My brother's plan exposed, my mother confronted, and the future I was entitled to finally acknowledged. The next hours unfolded quietly, with authority doing its work. My brother was escorted under supervision back to the United States, facing charges related to child endangerment and document theft. His athletic scholarship, which required a clean record, was now at risk. I didn't watch him leave. I stayed focused on my own position. My mother was given a formal warning and required to participate in family counseling. Her involvement had been partial, misled by years of favoritism and his manipulations, but the authorities made it clear she had failed to fulfill her responsibility as a parent. The trust fund remained untouched. Legal protections held firm. Everything my father had structured to safeguard my future was intact. No one could touch it, no one could argue against it. Mohammed arranged for my return home. I received emergency travel documents, a first-class upgrade, and an escort through the airport. The flight itself was surreal, a quiet contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. I watched clouds pass beneath the plane, thinking of the way events had shifted so precisely while I had only observed and answered questions. When I landed, my grandmother was waiting. Her hug was steady and warm, a reminder that some family could hold what others could not. She drove me home, giving me space to process the fallout and decide how to handle contact with my mother later. The consequences were clear and unavoidable. My brother had lost leverage. My mother had been forced to acknowledge what she had overlooked, and I had regained control over my own life and my own future, quietly, without needing anyone to validate me beyond the facts and protections already in place. When I left the airport, Mohammed handed me his card. He told me to call if I ever needed anything, explaining quietly that I reminded him of his daughter. I nodded, feeling a calm weight settle in my chest, the sense that someone had seen me fully, even if for a moment, and acted. At home, everything felt still. The chaos of Dubai, Bangkok, and betrayal had receded. My brother was being processed by authorities. My mother faced counseling and formal interviews. The trust fund remained untouched, and I held the quiet knowledge that my father had protected me. I unpacked my bag slowly, arranging documents and notes from the day. The world outside continued indifferent, but inside that apartment, I felt boundaries reinforced, control quietly restored. The experience had shifted something fundamental. I was no longer invisible. I had been ignored, left behind, manipulated, but not anymore. I sat by the window, watching the city lights turn on, letting the calm settle. Everything else, the anger, the fear, the betrayal, was still there, but it had a framework now. I could act from clarity, not confusion. And for the first time in years, I felt a quiet, unshakable sense of being fully seen.